Welcome to video 4 in chapter 5, where we're discussing different types of tissue. Last video, we ended up speaking about specialized connective tissue. And as you remember, excuse me, specialized connective tissues include structures like cartilage, bone, and blood, and they have a unique matrix associated with each of these tissues and some cells that are going to be very specialized within these tissues. Cartilage is the first type of specialized connective tissue. We said that it is um, rigid and strong, yet it has this squishy, collagenous, gel-like ground substance, like gristle on the ends of bones. It's firm, but it has some give to it. That is that gel, collagen in gel-like ground substance. We said that chondrocytes, cartilage cells, sit in a lacuna, a little lake, a little chamber. They kind of hang out in there. And then it gets surrounded by this collagenous gel-like ground substance or matrix. We said that cartilage lacks a blood supply. Because it lacks a blood supply, it tends to heal very slowly. So if you've ever had damage to some of the cartilage in your body between joints, then you know that it tends to heal a lot slower than other tissues. It'll be achier and sore for longer periods of time as it's healing. This tissue is also covered by a perichondrium, peri meaning around, chondro meaning cartilage. So this is going to be a connective tissue layer that is surrounding the cartilage. So perichondrium. This provides some nutrients to the cartilage because the cartilage is avascular. It heals slowly. So this perichondrium surrounding it has its own access to its own blood nutrient supply. So it receives blood nutrients and it sends those nutrients to the cartilaginous tissue that it's surrounding. You have three different types of cartilage. You have hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Let's get into that. So, hyaline cartilage is going to be your most abundant type of cartilage. It is going to be found in different matrices, especially on the ends of your bones, in your joints, the tip of your nose. So if you put your finger on the tip of your nose and you squish it in, that squishiness, that firm, it's not really going to fall apart and break, but it's still squishy. That's cartilage, specifically hyaline cartilage. In your respiratory passages, so your airways are made up of hyaline cartilage, and then the embryonic skeleton. So the skeleton, as it is being built in embryos before they are born, their skeletons, their cartilage, their skeletons are made up of hyaline cartilage. And eventually, after birth, that cartilage starts to turn to bone. But before then, it is made of hyaline cartilage. This is what allows babies to go through the narrow vaginal birth canal and not break any bones because their bones are squishy and more flexible. So that is hyaline cartilage, the most abundant type or the most common type of cartilage that we have. Next is elastic cartilage. And as we mentioned before, something that's elastic is able to stretch. So yeah, elastic is able to stretch. And because it is full of these elastic fibers, it is going to be more flexible. So the outside of your ear, you can wiggle that around, move that around, stretch it a little bit because it has more of the elastic fibers. This is elastic cartilage. Then you have fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is very tough because it has much more collagen fibers associated with it. So remember, Collagen is going to lend that strong tensile strength. It's going to be tough, but it's going to be flexible. So very tough. The first part of the word is fibro, so you should know that it has lots of collagen fibers associated with it. Fibrocartilage is going to be your shock absorbers. So as you walk, as you move, as you jump around, we don't really realize how much um, pressure, how many shock waves we're sending throughout our body with every step. Part of the reason why we don't notice it is because we have fibrocartilage that acts as shock absorbers. It takes the impact from that pounding that occurs when you step from take one step to another. That fibrocartilage is going to be the substance that absorbs that energy. This is going to be located in your intervertebral discs. So the discs that are between the vertebrae or the vertebral bones. So when you have the vertebral bones stacked up on each other, you have bone, disc, bone, disc. These intervertebral discs are going to be the shock absorbers between each of your vertebral bones. The pads of the knee, so the menisci of the knee are going to be made up of fibrocartilage. I'm sure you've heard of somebody that tore their meniscus. That's going to be that fibrocartilage between the knee that gets torn in some activities, especially sports, where a person is changing directions quickly. They might come in contact with another athlete, and that tears and ruptures, especially if you're coming in contact while you're trying to turn. That puts more stress and strain on those cartilaginous structures, and it may cause it to tear. And then the pelvic girdle. So the pelvis, the hips, the bones that make up the hips, that hold the legs as a part of the body or attaches the leg to the body. Um, Portions of the pelvis are going to be made up of fibrocartilage. This very tough um, cartilaginous structure that has lots of cartilaginous fibers that act as shock absorbers. So, looking at hyaline cartilage first. Hyaline cartilage, you see it looks very unique. Um, And this sort of structure, once you know it, you'll know it. Like once you see it under the microscope, regardless of what color it is, because it's not always this dark purple color, but you have these cells. So, right, these little red cells inside of the little lacunae. So, cells inside of the lacunae, surrounded by ground matrix. This is what hyaline cartilage looks like. All right, so these little cells are going to be your chondrocytes located in the lacunae, and you have this extracellular matrix, hyaline cartilage. Remember, hyaline cartilage is the most common type of cartilage that we have in the body. In the picture associated with this image, you see highlighted the tips of the ribs. So the spaces that connect the ribs directly to the breastbone or the sternum are going to be made up of cartilage. This is why in lab, when you learned of the quadrants or the regions of the abdominal pelvic cavity, that the ones here and here were called the hypochondriac area because it was below the cartilage of the ribs. And so this cartilage now, is made up of hyaline cartilage. Then you have elastic cartilage. So these little lines that go through it that you don't see here, these little lines are going to be your elastic fibers. But again, you have your chondrocyte, the little cells, sitting in a lacuna, little bed, little lake where where it lives, where it's protected. And surrounding that, you have this ground substance or this matrix that also has these elastic fibers associated with it. Again, has a very unique look. Then you have fibrocartilage. So in your fibrocartilage, you have your chondrocytes. So the cells that make up the substances here. They live in these little lakes, the lacuna, and you have your ground substance surrounding the chondrocytes in the lacuna. But then you also have this ground substance. I'm sorry, the collagen fibers here. All right, so collagen fibers within this ground substance that all surround the chondrocytes that live in a lacuna. And again, these, because they have lots of collagen, they have lots of tensile strength. These will act as your shock absorbers. And the example is the discs in between the vertebrae. The next type of specialized connective tissue that we'll delve into is bone. Bone is known as an osseous tissue. All right, osseous tissue. Osseous basically meaning bony. It is going to be the most rigid type of connective tissue that we have. It's going to have a solid matrix, unlike your um, your fibrocartilage that's going to have this gel-like matrix that's going to make it rather squishy, which is why it's able to absorb shock from you walking. So bone has a solid matrix. This solid matrix is going to be composed of lots of mineral salts, especially calcium salt, but it's not the only mineral. We know that calcium is most abundant in the body in the bones, and we know that calcium makes up a large portion of the bones, but it's not the only mineral that is located in the bones. You also have other minerals like magnesium, etc. And it has collagen. So you're starting to see collagen in more and more places. Remember, collagen lends strength, lends tensile strength to a substance. So your minerals are going to make it hard, but your collagen is going to give it more of the ability to not be as brittle on impact. All right, so this is why every time we take a step or we jump or we do something that is harsher to the body, the bones don't shatter, partially because they have collagen associated intermixed inside of the matrix. This is a supportive structure. Obviously, a bone supports the rest of the body. It protects vital organs, like the skull protects your brain, the vertebrae protects your spinal cord. Inside of bone, we have a substance that actually produces blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells. We call that bone marrow. All right, so bone marrow is going to sit inside of bones and it's going to produce blood cells. Because it is solid, the solidness of the bone, I said, is because it's made up of these mineral salts, like calcium salt. So another salt is going to be your phosphate, right? Your phosphate, your potassium, all of those salts are going to be stored in there. And part of the reason why the bones store these minerals is not only to add solidity and strength to your bones, but also to be a reservoir for minerals if the body needs it. So, for example, you have lots of calcium stored in your bones, but let's say you're not eating a calcium-rich diet and your blood calcium levels get low. Well, instead of trying to just wait for the next meal because so many structures absolutely depend on calcium in order to work, you have to get calcium where it needs to be. And remember I said that the normal ranges of substances in the body, there's a narrow range of calcium. There is a narrow range of substances that of calcium that needs to be in the blood. If it goes below that amount, it needs to immediately correct it. If it goes above that amount, it needs to immediately correct it. If the blood calcium level gets too low, it will then start to mine or remove some of the calcium from bones so that it can now be circulating in the bloodstream to allow other cells to use calcium as it needs to. Bones are used as attachment sites for your muscles. It forms your skeleton. And instead of chondrocytes, you have osteocytes. Osteo meaning bone, site meaning cell. So the bone is going to have osteocytes in lacuna instead of chondrocytes. Remember, chondro meant cartilage. So chondrocytes are going to be located in your cartilage, whereas osteocytes are going to be located in your bone. You have two different types of bone. You have compact bone and spongy bone. All right, compact bone and spongy bone. Both of these types of bone can be found on the same bone structure, different locations, but in the same bone structure. And we'll get into that in a little while. So, compact bone. Compact bone is just as the name implies. You have this hard structure where all of the components are densely packed together. They're compact. Osteoblasts, remember, anytime you see blasts at the end of the word, think build. We already said osteos refers to the bones. So these are going to be cells that build bone. So osteoblasts deposit matrix in lamellae. The word lamellae basically means layers. So in compact bone, these bone cells are going to start putting down its matrix, its substance, in layers around in layers basically. So then the lamellae are going to form these rings around a central structure. These central structures are called a central canal. Inside of these central canals, you'll have things like your blood vessels, your nerves, your lymphatic vessels. So the bones are rich in blood supply. Bones are rich in nerve supply. And these nerves and blood vessels are going to be surrounded by this matrix deposited by these osteoblasts, and this matrix is going to be formed in layers, like the rings of a tree, very similar to the rings of a tree. Once we see a picture of it, I'll show you what we're talking about. So osteocytes plus the matrix plus the central canal. When you take those all and put them together, they form a cylindrical unit. So a unit that looks like a cylinder. It's going to be round and long. These cylinders typically are the length of the bone itself. These units are called osteons, and each section of compact bone will have several different osteons associated with it, tightly packed together. Now, these osteocytes, I said that they're also going to be located inside of a lacuna, which is a little bed or depression in the bone where it lives. Because it's isolated from other cells, remember, it's in a lake, it's in a little bed. So it's not going to be able to travel to other cells. These cells are fixed. So they need to be able to communicate with other cells. They need to be able to communicate with nearby osteocytes. It needs to be able to share substances, share products, share information. So what it does is the osteocyte will have little projections, a bunch of little arms coming from the cell itself, and they're going to travel through the bone in little canals, canaliculi, little canals. where these projections from the osteocytes are extending through the little canals, and eventually one osteocyte's little projection is going to connect with another osteocyte's little projection, and that's how these osteocytes are able to share information and blood supply, etc., and communicate with each other. Remember, the osteon is going to be a cylindrical unit that is made up of osteocytes, the matrix, the extracellular matrix, and that central canal. These osteons, you have a lot of different osteons tightly packed together to form compact bone. These are going to be cemented together. They are not coming apart. And as I mentioned before, your central canals contain things like blood vessels. So bone is very well nourished because bone has lots of blood vessels running through it to feed the bone tissue itself. So bone, when it is damaged, it's going to heal much, much, much more quickly than cartilage. Cartilage, remember, does not have its own blood supply. Bone does. So bones, if someone broke a bone and they ripped their cartilage or tore their cartilage, and let's say the extent of the damage was the same on both structures, the bone is absolutely going to heal much faster than the cartilage. So we said there are two types of bones. You have compact bones where you have all of these osteons that are tightly packed together. The next type is spongy bone. Spongy bone looks just like a sponge. If you ever looked at a sponge, you know that it has lots of little holes, and then you have, like, if this is a yellow sponge, like the little yellow fibers that kind of runs and connects, that holds in the holes, and these with a lot of different spaces, right? So the spongy bone is going to look similar to that. This makes up the interior part of the bone. So you have a bone, and typically the structure of the bone is going to be your compact bone is going to be on the outside, and then on the inside, you're going to have more of the spongy type of bone. What makes the bone spongy are these bony plates inside of them that have these osteocytes. And that's going to be what creates these spaces. The spaces in the bone is what holds the bone marrow inside the bone. Because the bone has lots of little holes in it, which makes it spongy, spongy bone is going to be lighter in weight than compact bone. Compact bone, there are no spaces, everything is filled. So between the osteocytes in the lacuna, the compact bone is going to have this hard extracellular matrix made up of the calcium and other salts and the collagen. Everything's going to be very packed together. Um, and so not a lot of space. That's going to give it its weight. That's going to make it more heavy. Whereas your spongy bone is going to be lighter because it has more holes in it. So this is compact bone. This is what a cross section of compact bone looks like. So here you see an osteon. An osteon, remember, is going to be your central canal, your osteocytes, and the matrix that is deposited in lamellae, or these concentric rings. So this is the drawing. You say you have one osteocyte here, osteocyte there, osteocyte there. So in this real image of bone tissue, you have osteons. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Even though you can't see the central canal, this is still an osteon. The central canal on this one may just not be in the view of this particular slice. And then you have an osteon there. And each of these osteons has a central canal that has blood vessels, nerve tissues, etc., running through it. And again, these little spaces here are going to be your osteocytes inside of its lacuna, and you can see the rings surrounding each one. That is an osteon. Here is, so if you take one of these little dots and expand it, that's going to be what your osteocyte looks like inside of the lacuna, the little lake or the little bed that is housing and protecting it, surrounded by this extracellular matrix, surrounded by this matrix that's made up of collagen and mineral salts like calcium. On the surface of these cells, you can see the little projections. So these little projections are going to go all out into the surrounding matrix and connect with other cells. So you see these little black lines that are coming from the lacuna are going to be filled with these little processes, and that's going to help this cell connect with the adjacent cells. Next specialized connective tissue is blood. Now, we just saw this most solid type of connective tissue, which is bone. Um, the most liquid type of connective tissue is going to be blood. Blood has two main components. You have your formed elements and your fluid matrix. The formed elements, these are going to things that have a shape. Your cells and your cell fragments are going to be the formed elements. So your red blood cells, your white blood cells are formed elements. And then your cell fragments are going to be your platelets. Platelets are the portion of blood that helps the blood clot. So all of those have a shape. They're either whole cells or fragments of cells. Those are going to be your formed elements. Anything outside of the formed elements is going to be this fluid matrix called plasma. So blood is composed of plasma and your formed elements. There are different types of formed elements. So I just talked about the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. The main job of red blood cells is to transport gases, so your oxygen and carbon dioxide to and from the lungs, to and from the cells and the lungs. That's the job of your red blood cell. Your white blood cells are part of your immune system, so they're going to fight against infection. If there is an invader, they're going to get to work and help to defend the body against the invader by clearing it out, killing it, clearing it out. And platelets are bone fragments, I'm sorry, not bone fragments, cell fragments that are responsible for helping your blood clot. So if you get a cut or a bruise, instead of bleeding either internally or externally from that damage, your platelets will help to clot the blood so that you don't have excessive blood loss. Blood's job is to transport substances around the body. So just like your red blood cells transport gases, the blood itself will transport things like nutrients. It'll transport wastes to your organs of elimination. It'll transfer things like minerals, vitamins, macronutrients, etc. Blood is a transporter. So this is what blood looks like. So here you have your white blood cells. White blood cells are not going to look like the majority of blood cells. These are going to be, and they are going to look different from each other because there are different types of white blood cell. Um, and these are going to be more spread out. As you can see in this image, you only have one. Well, maybe two. All right, but the far majority of the cells in this matrix or in blood are your red blood cells. And you see how you have this space on the middle. It's not really a space, it's just not as much substance there. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about blood specifically. But red blood cells are going to make up the majority of blood. Then you have white blood cells, and this little dot here is an example of your platelets. So remember, platelets are blood. Let me take that back. Platelets are cell fragments that float around and help your blood to clot when necessary. And then all of that is suspended in plasma, which is your liquid extracellular matrix that makes up blood. So Here are your different types of connective tissues here. And it tells you what it looks like. The specialized connective tissue, what it looks like, its job inside the body, and where it's located. So that's your summary of what we just discussed. Let's talk a little bit about membranes. So membranes are sheets of cells. That is it. A membrane is a sheet of cells. Epithelial membranes are composed of epithelial tissue and connective tissue. So remember, this is a sheet of tissue, and now we're mixing two different types of cells. Or let me say you have two different types of cells or two different types of tissues that can make up your epithelial membranes. Remember, epithelium cover body surfaces and line body cavities. So membranes will also cover body surfaces and line body cavities. There are three different types of epithelial membranes. You have a serous membrane, mucous membrane, and cutaneous membrane. So, serous membrane. Serous membranes will line body cavities that do not open to the outside of the body. So body cavities that open up to the outside of the body, like your nasal cavity, your oral cavity, your ears, all of those are going to be cavities that open to the outside. There are spaces and cavities that don't open to the outside, like your abdomen, your throat, like some of your respiratory airways, all right? Some of those spaces don't open directly to the outside of the body. Excuse me. So, these membranes, these serous membranes will line your thoracic cavity or chest cavity. It'll line your abdomen or the belly cavity. Serous membranes also cover organs. Serous membranes are going to be made up of simple squamous epithelium as well as areolar connective tissue. So you have epithelium and connective tissue that creates serous membranes. Serous membranes are going to secrete a substance that lubricates that membrane, and it's going to be a serous fluid. Your serous fluids are going to be more of your liquidy types of fluid. All right. It's going to be closer to the consistency of water. So these membranes are going to produce, and then secrete this watery fluid onto the surface of the serous membrane to help lubricate it and reduce friction. Remember, two dry tissues rubbing together would be like you having dry hands and then rubbing your hands together real fast, often. So if that happens, I mean, if you do that, eventually your hands are going to start to get warm. And if you keep doing it, you'll start to have tissue damage. So to avoid that, the body lubricates it. All right. So serous membranes produce serous fluid, which is a watery type of fluid. Mucous membranes. Mucous membranes also line body cavities, but these are going to line the cavities and tubes that actually open to the outside. So your nose, your mouth, those are going to have membranes that are mucous membranes. Mucous membranes are going to secrete mucus instead of a watery fluid. So mucus, is thicker, it's more viscous. And so that's going to protect those cavities that open up to the outside that are potentially going to dry out, that are that have more exposure to bacteria and viruses and things that may want to disrupt and destroy our cells. So mucus is going to help protect that. So you'll find these lining the digestive tract, the respiratory tract, urinary tract, reproductive tract. All of these tracts have openings to the outside. So you want to be able to protect those structures even more. by having a thicker fluid protecting it. Mucous membranes are made up of epithelium and areolar connective tissue, just like this is epithelium and areolar connective tissue. So similar makeup of the types of cells, epithelium and areolar connective, but different secretions because they're in different locations. Right. So we talked about goblet cells previously. Goblet cells, remember, are going to be your unicellular glandular cells associated with your columnar epithelium. And these cells are going to produce and secrete mucus directly onto body surfaces, which is how mucous membranes and these membranes end up having mucus that is there to protect that cell in those tissues. Cutaneous membrane. If you hear cutaneous, think skin. So cutaneous membranes will cover your body surfaces, again, commonly called skin. This is a part of the integumentary system, the system that encompasses your skin and all the associated structures. So cutaneous membranes, we'll talk more detail about that in the next chapter, chapter 6, which is about the integumentary system. Now, we also have synovial membranes. So synovial membranes are going to be a different type of membrane. It's going to be different from your epithelial membranes. All right. All the rest of those membranes were had an epithelial component along with a connective uh, component, connective tissue component. Synovial membranes are going to be comprised mostly of connective tissue as opposed to epithelium and connective tissue. This is going to be the membrane that lines your joints. So when you look at a joint, so if you put two bones together, you have these tendons that are going to hold the bones in place. Then you're going to have in most bones that in most joints, you're going to have these membranes that kind of line it to also hold it together, but also to perform its job in lubricating and nourishing and protecting those joints. So different membrane types, um, three of which are epithelial type membranes. So serous membranes, that is made up of epithelium and areolar connective tissue that secretes a serous fluid, which is more watery. Mucous membranes that are made up of epithelium and areolar connective tissue that is surrounded by or that is surrounded by mucus or that is coated with mucus. That is a thicker, more viscous lubrication that is secreted by your unicellular glands that are called goblet cells. Your cutaneous membrane is going to be made up of epithelium and connective tissue, and that is your skin, the surface of your body. And then we have your synovial membrane that is made up of pretty much all connective tissue, no epithelial tissue, and this is what's going to be what's going to line your joints. We'll talk more about this in the joints chapter. The next type of tissue that we find in the body is muscle tissue. So general characteristics of muscle tissues, it's excitable, which means that it will respond to stimulus by the nervous system. Once the nervous system sends a signal, it can respond very quickly. And that response is to contract, and that contraction is what allows movement. Depending on the type of muscle cell, that'll determine the type of movement. But because we have these muscle cells, those muscle cells will move in response to some stimulus by the nervous system. The cells of muscle tissue is called muscle fiber. So you won't call it like a well, in some cases you'll call it a myocyte, but for the most part, when we're talking about muscle tissue, if you hear the term muscle fiber, we're literally talking about a muscle cell. Characteristic is that it is contractile, meaning that it can contract, and when it contracts, it gets shorter and thicker. Of course, it gets thicker. Well, of course, it gets shorter because it is contracting. It is making itself more compact, but that tissue has to go somewhere, so that causes it to get thicker. You have three different types of muscle tissue. You have skeletal muscle, the muscle that makes up the tissue that helps you walk, helps you move, that's attached to your skeleton. You have cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is the muscle that makes up the heart. And then you have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is going to be the muscle that is associated with your organs, with your blood vessels. So remember, like your organs contract as well. Your stomach contracts to help churn your food. Your blood vessels contract to help move the blood through the body. So your heart contracts, yes, with its own specialized tissue, but then as it's contracting, the blood vessels are going to help contract and move that blood throughout the body. And that is smooth muscle. So the first type, skeletal muscle. Remember I said that is going to be the muscles that is attached to bones. These are going to be voluntary muscles, meaning you move those because you want to. If you wanted to get up right now and get some water, you would walk, you would move to the edge of your seat, you'd stand up, you'd walk to the kitchen or wherever it is to get some water to drink. That is voluntary. The fact that I'm speaking right now, the muscles of my face, the muscles of my mouth, they are moving in such a way that it's allowing me to vocalize my thoughts. All right, so voluntary, you are able to control it. When you look at skeletal muscles under the microscope, they look striated. Make sure you look up the definition of striated. But basically, they have stripes. All right, so the way the muscle cells or the muscle fibers are associated, are put together, they are put together in such a way where it looks like it has stripes or striated. These cells are going to be long, they're going to be cylindrical, so they're going to look like little tubes, and they're going to be multinucleated, meaning each muscle fiber is going to have many different nuclei. Muscle cells are stimulated by nerve cells. That's the nerve impulses are going to be what helps it to contract or what signals it to contract. So remember I said that muscle fibers are long and cylindrical. So these are the long cylinders, and in this actual picture, these are your long cylinders. They are multinucleated. So if this is one muscle fiber, it has multiple different nuclei, multinucleated. And you can see these stripes, these striations in the muscle fibers. So stripes, striations. Smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is not striated. So when you look at it under the microscope, you'll automatically know that it's not skeletal muscle because it doesn't have stripes. It's going to be spindle shaped. So remember that your skeletal muscle is cylindrical. It looks like long tubes, striped tubes with lots of nuclei per muscle fiber. Smooth muscle don't have the striations. It doesn't have the same shape. This is going to be shaped more like a spindle. And these are going to be involuntary. Remember I said that your smooth muscle will line your organs and your blood vessels. So they're involuntary. It would take a lot of brain energy for you to have to think about your blood vessels pumping to push the blood through your body every second of every day, however many times blood pumps in a minute. It would be a lot of energy for you to have to remember to make your food move through the digestive system, move through your esophagus, move through your stomach, move through your small and large intestines. Since we don't have to do that, We don't have to think about it. These muscles are involuntary. Then you have your cardiac muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle tissue is only going to be found in the walls of the heart. These cells branch. So, cardiac muscle cells have branches. Smooth muscle cells look like little spindles, and skeletal muscle cells look like cylinders. Cardiac muscle cells are also involuntary. You don't control your heart. Your heart beats at least, or usually an average heartbeat is going to be between 70 and 80 beats per minute. So, the fact that you don't have to think about your heart pumping 80 times every single minute of every moment of your life, involuntary. These cells are also going to be striated. So if you see cells, muscle cells under the microscope, and you see striations, you can automatically know that it's either going to be your cardiac muscle or your skeletal muscle, because smooth muscles do not have striations. Another unique thing about cardiac cells or cardiac muscle tissue is they have intercalated discs. So these are going to be your intercellular junctions that are specialized. So they're going to be thicker, darker bands inside of these cardiac muscle tissue. So not only will you see the striations, but you'll also see the intercalated discs. So looking at smooth muscle first, you can see how these muscles taper off in both ends, like this muscle tapers off at that end, tapers off at this end. That is a spindle shape, and that is what makes up your smooth muscle. And these muscles do not have striations, so you don't see stripes in these muscle cells. All right, that's smooth muscle. Cardiac muscle. So we said that it branches. So you can see here it's branching, and then it branches again, And you can see that and the more you look at your cardiac muscle. But even if you cannot see that, there are the other structures that will help you know it is cardiac muscle without necessarily seeing the branching. So you have striations, right? Little bitty stripes in each of these muscle fibers. And now you can see these little darker lines. The darker lines are the intercalated discs. That is the intercellular junction. So this is one muscle cell. This is another muscle cell, and they're connected at the intercalated disc. So intercalated disc is going to be a huge way to identify cardiac muscle cells. The final tissue type is nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is going to be what's found in your brain, your spinal cord, and in the nerves that leave the brain and spinal cord and service the rest of the body, the periphery of the body. Neurons are going to be your main nervous cells. These are cells that are specialized for communication, and the way it communicates is by sending electrical impulses, nerve impulses. So think about the wiring in the walls of your home, of the school, of your room. Those wires send electricity, electrical impulses to tell whatever is tapped into or plugged into those sockets, it's going to tell it what to do. The same idea occurs with your nervous cells. So these cells are going to conduct these nerve impulses, these electrical impulses that tell other structures what to do. You have two different types of neurons, two different types of neurons. You have sensory reception and motor control. The sensory reception, basically, this allows you to receive information from your environment, your external environment. When it's cold, a sensory receptor is going to receive cold information and send that signal back to the brain and spinal cord to decide if you need to do anything. If you do, what needs to happen. The motor control are going to be Motor controls are the nervous impulses that actually tell something what to do. So if a sensory receptor, a sensory nerve, gets information that I am cold, then it's going to send signal to the brain and the spinal cord to say it's cold. If it is cold enough, then the nervous system is going to send signal to your motor neurons that tell it to move. That movement might be shivering, that movement might be you standing up to walk, but that is all part of the function of your neurons, the main cells of the nervous system that are specialized for communication. Neurons coordinate, integrate, and regulate your body functions. And it is composed of, each neuron is composed of a cell body, dendrites, and axons, and one axon. So your cell body is also called the soma. Cell body is called the soma. You have dendrites and axons. Those are going to be projections that come from the stoma. I'm sorry, the soma, not stoma. That's something completely different. Another type of cell associated with the nervous system is neuroglia. These are going to be supporting cells. These are going to be cells that support and nourish the neurons. So neurons are going to have the job of communication. Neuroglia are going to have the job of supporting the neurons. There are different types of neuroglia, but know that all of them function to support and nourish neurons, even though they do it in different ways, slightly different ways. So, nervous cell shape, you have the cell body or the soma of the cell with lots of little projections. So, most of the projections are going to be dendrites. Dendrites receive information from other cells. And then you're going to have one axon that comes off of that soma, and the axon is going to send that signal to the next cell, whether it's another neuron or it's a muscle or gland or some other cellular structure. So signals are received by dendrites, it passes through the cell body or the soma, and then it goes into the axon to be sent to another type of cell. All right, so make sure you read this about tissue engineering so that you can understand how the information about tissues that you just learned are being used in medicine and technology. Here is your graph of the different types of muscle and nerve tissue so that you can know the names of them, the descriptions, the functions, and the locations. Please make sure that you understand these descriptions because that's going to help you be able to identify these structures when we look at them under the microscope in the lab. And that is it for Chapter 5, Tissues.